Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'nasan Lanu Es Taraso Baruch Ata Adonai Nosein HaTorah Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. All right, let me go out of the way. So we are in the second chapter of Rus. We started it last week. We got through the first 2 verses of the second chapter, so we're moving along. And if you remember what's happening here at this moment, Naomi and Rus have come back to Israel. They're very destitute. There are fields, but it's too late in the season to plant anything, so they're very hungry. I don't know why they didn't sell the fields. I don't know if there was property issues they had to clarify first. I don't know if that was like, no, you never sell your ancestral fields. So that would have been like too extreme. They had to found some other way of survival. But the chapter opened up by telling us they had a very, very, very wealthy relative, Boaz, who they decided not to turn to. We don't know if Rus, it's differing opinions among the sages if Rus knew about Boaz, but Naomi definitely did. As we said, he was her nephew, though he was probably older than her at this time because he's 80 years old. But he was her nephew, and he was the judge of the people, and he was very, very wealthy. And of course, he would probably have generously helped her, but she chose that she's not turning for help from man. She's turning to God. We discussed this last week at length. Yes, understanding the various reasons why she would not take his help, and instead she would allow her daughter-in-law to go out. Her daughter-in-law, the literally princess, not a Jappy princess, but a real one, literally allow her to go out among the poorest of the poor, the beggars, to glean from the fallen sheaves, but not to take charity. So that's what's happening. So now we have Rus again. Now Rus volunteered. It wasn't that that Naomi asked her. It wasn't that Naomi suggested it. Rus said, "Hey, I'm allowed to do this." And as we see, and as we're going to see in the verses today, Rus by now was fairly knowledgeable. Now again, she didn't just convert. Remember, she really converted 10 years earlier. Now we know the conversion 10 years prior was valid, but she's had 10 years exposure to Judaism, and seemingly she seems like a very pious and intelligent woman. Again, she's not a little girl either. At this point, she's 40. So she had time to study. So she knew the laws. She knew there's this concept. She knows she can take. It's the rights of the poor. And this way they'd have sustenance. So instead of her mother-in-law having to do it, she said, I'll go and I'll do it. Not to go through the physically arduous work, and of course not go through the embarrassment. I'll go and I'll do it. And Naomi said, okay, my daughter, go. Like my daughter, I mean, I love you, you know, you're everything. You're the only thing I have left. I have nothing left but you. So it's not like, I don't care about you. You're just a daughter-in-law. No, my daughter. But that's the situation go. So that's what happens. And this is, again, like everything else, all part of God's plot. And what God's plotting here is the fortuitous, not random meeting of Boaz and Rus. It's just so obvious, so many details here, which again, when you're living them, they seem harsh. And they're all to come ultimately to this point of Rus and Boaz getting married. Like her being childless for 10 years, that's harsh. And obviously there were other reasons for it. And obviously it was part of Machlon's punishment. But it was also, again, so there'll be a reason for Boaz and Rus to get married. Their destitute state, them being so impoverished. There were reasons for it, but it was also to bring her into his fields, that she went to his field, that he came to his field. You know, everything is so precise and just so reminds us that that's true in our life as well. It's not just, oh, and these people, you know, these are big storybook people, you know, in the scriptures. No, for each one of us, Every detail is God's plotting the script. And sometimes details that seem harsh or painful, like a lot of the details here, is part of God's movement in a way that's only for kindness, only for your good that you appreciate and understand is good. But it sometimes takes a while to reach that point. But with Rus and Boaz, things unfold rather quickly. So, verse 3. So off she went. She came and gleaned in the field behind the harvesters, and her fate made her happen upon a parcel of land belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Now remember, we got introduced to Boaz in verse 1. This is only verse 3. We haven't spaced out yet. But the verse is saying very strongly, okay, so she goes off and she's gleaning. Everything's very precise behind the harvesters. And it happened to be, she was clueless. Either she was clueless, she doesn't know who Boaz is, she doesn't know they're related, or she doesn't know this is his field. But she cluelessly happens to come to the field of Boaz, who's a relative. The fact that he's a relative is very significant in the storyline. So Boaz is a relative, as we said. He was a nephew. He was the son of Elimelech's brother. He was a cousin of her deceased husband. So she went and she came. That sort of is a little strange. That's how the verse says it. There's many, many commentaries on this. Some say like she went and she came back and she went and she came back, because a lot of the people of that class that are like sort of both harvesting and begging were not like the most honorable, noble people. And she knew they weren't people that she should be with. So she kept going and coming until she felt a place that felt secure, that this is going to be kosher, which again is showing you, as we're going to see, a lot of modesty and refinement, which isn't just, well, of course, modesty and refinement, she's such a special person, but it is very special where she's coming from a very depraved nation of Moab. Moab was the roots. Moab means from the father. This started off in this relationship of Lot and his daughter, and the daughter was even proud of it. She called her son from my father. You know, that was sort of indicative of the people. And then to produce Rus, who's so pure that she's not feeling comfortable in these types of people, that she keeps going back to find people she's comfortable with. This shows you like, wow, how did she emerge from here? And there's lots of other explanations. And Malbim says she went and she came because right away, boom, there she was. Boaz's field was, again, fortuitously very, very close to where they were living. And she gleaned in the field behind the harvesters. Now we said, and I mentioned this last week, you see this again in these words, that at this time, we discussed this, I remember last week, most of the poor were not gleaning. There's not so much net. You know, it's not so profitable to be gleaning if the harvesters happen to drop something and you get it. Where most of the poor were flocking were to the corners. Because remember, we said those corners were off limits. The harvesters couldn't touch them. They were only for the poor. So you're going to find a lot more and a lot faster going to those corners. But remember, she said she didn't want to. She was modest, she was refined, she was delicate. She didn't want to be like scrounging, grabbing, or, you know, in such close physical proximity to who knows who. And she said, no, it's okay. Nobody else was around. She was the only one gleaning because it wasn't worth it. But for her, she preferred this less profitable, but more modest approach. And God will take care, you know, what she needs to get, she will get. And it's also, you see very clearly, she stays behind the harvester. So she's staying behind the harvesters for two very practical reasons. One is modesty. Again, the harvesters weren't necessarily, who knows what type of people they were. So she wasn't getting too close to them either. The harvesters were ahead of her, and then at a distance, she was behind them. Nothing happening between the two of them. And also, she wanted to make sure that these were truly things they dropped, they left behind. Because if it wasn't, if they were just in the middle of gathering their bundles and some things were on the floor and she grabbed it, but it really was theirs, and she didn't want to start with that. So they were ahead, and then she came to take what was obviously the leftovers, what obviously had been dropped. And drum roll, next verse. Behold, Boaz arrives from Bethlehem. Remember, Bethlehem is like the town. Now he went to the fields out of sight of Bethlehem where his property is. He greeted the harvesters, God be with you. And they answered him, may God bless you. Which sounds to us pretty like standard fare. God be with you, God be with you. Actually, we're told this is something literally that day he innovated. It was something that he created. Remember, he was the judge. Judge doesn't just mean like the political leader of the Jews. It really means the spiritual leader of the Jews. So he was the head of the highest Beit Din, the tribunal court, and he instituted that day this concept that we greet people blessing them with God's name, that we want to bring the name of God on the lips of people. And therefore, we're starting by saying, God be with you, and they're going to respond, God be with you. And this is how we want people to talk, that God should be on our lips, not in an inappropriate way, in a reverent way, but in a way that we're remembering God constantly. It's interesting because we say this about the Baal Shem Tov, that the Baal Shem Tov would go around and he would specifically ask you, like, how you doing? How's the wife? How's the kids? How's the finances? To get them to say, thank God, thank God, thank God, thank God. To get God's name on their lips. That's a very important thing for people to mention God. Also, I think, as you might see, because of course we've discussed this idea of how each one of us has an obligation to reach out and be a lamplighter for others, that very often when you're conversing with people that maybe are a little far from God, and the more you consistently mention God, the more natural it becomes to them. I mean, the more you would say, thank God this worked out. With God's help, this will work out. I'm sure God is with us and this is going to be okay. Thank God, with God's help, God willing. The more you say it, it becomes natural, because there's a lot of people in our world, in our country, that God's sort of like an uncomfortable noun. It's not a word they're comfortable saying. They don't think of it as like, part of they believe in God, but in sort of more a remote, detached way, not as something that's in the details of life. But what you find is when you keep using the name of God, when you keep talking about God to people, of course, many of you are still working virtually, so I don't know how much interactions you have, but hopefully you have some. But as you keep speaking about God, not having a philosophical discussion on God, but just literally mentioning him, literally bringing him into the conversation more and more and more, especially with coworkers or people like that you frequently talk to, you will find that they're more and more comfortable. They more and more remember him the more you remind them of him. And they will even themselves mention him with God's help, God willing. They will echo back if you feed it to them enough. And this is exactly what Boaz is doing here. And Boaz literally initiated this concept and literally initiated it this day. This very day is when he established this with his tribunal court, with his Beit Din. Now, some say it's behold, it's unusual, like behold, vihine, and behold is like telling something's happening here. It's a little flourish, a little embellishment to the sentence. So some say it's because the behold is that something significant happened. He just finished his week of mourning. Remember, we said the day that Naomi and Rus came was the day his wife passed away. Now, the day she goes out to the fields to gather is the day he finished that week of mourning. They had enough time to settle down and get hungry. Others say the behold this is unusual. Boaz is this very, very, very wealthy man who's also the judge of the Jewish people, and he's busy with all the affairs of the Jewish people. He doesn't usually go out and check on his harvesters. Like, those are little details. He has managers, he has people that work for him. It's not where his head is going that he's going to go and like check how well the harvesters are harvesting his grain. So it was very unusual. It was, again, God bringing him to the field, God bringing Rus to the field, God having Boaz notice Rus, and to put all of this in motion. So that's the behold is the behold of this very unusual thing that Boaz personally is coming to the field because God wants him to see Rus. So especially here when we're talking about greeting people with God's name, especially here with the harvest, it's also sort of like reminding people about God when they're consumed with thinking about their livelihood. Like how good is the harvest? How much money are we making? How much we be paid? How much is a profit? And within that whole mindset, it's like, remember God. God's the one that's giving you your money. How much money are you going to earn? Exactly what God wants. And who's the source of everything you have? It's all Him. So especially in this arena, to really remind people of God's presence so they can hopefully connect the dots and realize that all of their welfare, it all comes from Him. So again, I don't know if you've had, I'm sure you have had experiences with this. Have any of you seen like the return, the payback, so to speak, that as you speak to people about God, you hear them more comfortably mentioning God or anything along those lines?
I've noticed that. Yes. Yes.
Specifically with coworkers or with people that you talk to?
Actually, with someone in particular, two people in my family.
And as you have been saying it consistently, now they say it as well.
Exactly, exactly. I'm so glad you highlighted it in that way because I thought about that and I think that really is true. And so, right, as it's a natural part of my talk, and now I've found through time that it's more a part of their talk.
That's a beautiful thing to see.
Mm-hmm.
I remember this very
Yes.
clearly. I had this with my grandmother many, many years ago. She passed away many years ago. But yeah, I always would talk to her, and I would always mention Mashiach. My grandmother she was traditional, she wasn't religious. And I remember at one point I was worrying over something. I have no clue what I was worrying over. It was 30 some years ago. But as I was stressing, she's like, why are you worried? Mashiach's coming. And I'm like, hey, I'm supposed to tell her that. She was like a perpetual worrier. It was like, a Jewish profession of hers. So she was a very good worrier. And I was to tell her that, and she was telling me that, but she was saying it sincerely. She wasn't joking. And I realized, like, wow, she really got it. She's heard it so many times that she's absorbed it and she's giving it back. So it's a beautiful thing to see. And it really, really happens. So I'm so glad Batsheva had that experience with two people. Anyone else has had that with people in their lives that they've seen that? That as they share and as they just bring God more and more, just as something in the conversation, they see the people they're talking to also reflect that?
I try to do that with people at work. And what I noticed that people who accept God, right, in whatever religion they are, they respond to it like kind of like the same way. But people who far, they just like,
They're uncomfortable. They don't know how to handle it.
Uncomfortable. Yeah.
Well, you just got to keep plugging away. Because I think when people are uncomfortable, it means it's very foreign to them. That's why they're uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And the more you say it, it becomes less and less foreign. But for people that are in some relationship with God, that on some level that He's in their life, it's probably nice for them to hear that you're allowed to use that word at work. That you can bring it in, and it probably makes them feel also that they want to echo that and remember it's about God. But I understand the discomfort. I understand that. And I still think that it's like planting seeds. You plant the seed, it takes a while for things to flourish, for things to grow, for you to harvest. But I wasn't going to ask Batsheva how long. Batsheva, do you have any like sort of time frame of when you saw it echoing back?
That's a good question. I think maybe I'm gonna just say about after 2 years. Yeah, that I've really noticed it, and they're culturally Jewish, and so it's really nice now that I reflect on it how how easily and naturally
Naturally.
they'll, yeah, naturally, exactly. And that, so something that I was saying, that was, that is something that I say that's natural to me, but then to notice how in different situations that they would make those same kind of references that then seemed natural to them. So yeah, so it's great to see that transference, but in a way, like
Exactly.
I said, in a way that felt natural, not I don't know, like not cliche, not like they were just saying a phrase, but it felt like
It's
um,
real, sincere.
yeah, like sincere, exactly. That it felt like a sincere expression. That is just, that's great.
Well, that's beautiful. Well, if it was only 2 years, there's a lot, there must have been a lot going on inside of them that it rose to the surface so swiftly.
Mhm.
I was gonna say that was gonna be my disclaimer to Chava if she said if she was gonna tell me she's gonna try this more than 2 years, that everybody has different levels of affinity, different levels of where it's natural, and obviously it's not only to these two people that Bathsheba's been speaking this way, and for these two, it clicked very deeply. Something resonated very powerfully, and maybe another person could take another year, and maybe another person take a year more than that. You know, there's a lot, sometimes got a lot of barriers to get through till a person not only is comfortable thinking it, but is comfortable saying it. That's a pretty big step, what you say, because what you say is really like your testimony to the world of where you're holding. So for someone to have God on their lips is a very strong sign of their belief. But I'd keep plugging away. It could be deliberately, I mean, deliberately, naturally, you know, but deliberately. Anyone else besides Chav has had that experience? With work, with colleagues, with family, neighbors, friends?
I feel like I've been personally affected by other people, like not
Oh,
saying the
nice.
other, you know what I mean? Like I used to be like, thank God, you know, and now I say Baruch Hashem, you know, and I feel like it's because I surrounded myself with the people, you know,
That speak like that.
and yeah, so.
That's beautiful. So that's the recipient's end of the story. Thank you for that, Froma. And everyone really, really, we are very powerful. We're powerful, and God works through us. We're really powerful. And for each person that you encounter, I mean, especially in certain areas, you can understand you might be the only God-fearing person in their world. And therefore, you have a special mission from God, a special responsibility to bring an awareness of Him to these people. Let's go back to our storyline here. Boaz is talking to the harvesters. I mean, this is Jews to Jews. This is, I mean, there only were religious, so to speak, in those days. Not about anyone who's not officially serving God. But yet, Boaz felt it was very important to remind them of God's existence. He was doing it deliberately to remind them of God's existence, not to assume they're conscious of God's existence, not to take for granted they have that relationship. You know, they could be, you know, religious, but not bringing God into the details of their lives and the details of their finances and the details of their harvest. And Boaz wanted to have them remember God in a very conscious way. And it's really every one of us. Anyone we meet, we have the ability that they should remember God in a very conscious way. You know, and even when we say things like, I know a lot of times when I'm on the phone with people, like, you know, I don't mean people I know, people I don't know, like customer service in any myriad of forms, some of whom are wonderful and many of whom are very unhelpful. And I always try to end by saying, thank you very much. You've been so nice. You've been so kind. Sometimes it's true, and sometimes I'm stretching it a bit. And, you know, now's the time of coming of the Messiah, of redemption, adding in goodness and kindness makes it happen. And thank you for just being such really helping me. And I noticed that, like it just happened today with someone. I mean, she was in a certain way helpful. In a certain way, she was sort of not so nice, but in a certain way, she was helpful. But I really said it trying to focus on the fact that in a certain way she was helpful, so I could be sincere in what I was saying. And I really felt her thaw as I said that. Like I could feel it over the phone. Like she was like, oh, you're viewing me as a person. You're appreciating me. And like, you know, like a tiny, tiny little conversation ensued, like really short. Maybe like I'll send it or two, but it was much more genuine. Like I could see she really was touched. So it's just again, a way of reminding people of God, reminding people of the coming redemption, reminding them that they're part of the process. And I've seen so many people that I speak to that are truly so touched. And I get into such lengthy conversations with these people on the phone, you know, customer service style, people that I'm calling because I'm obviously need something from them. And it's their job to do whatever it is or try. And I get an incredibly deep conversation. A woman started pouring out her whole heart to me and all of her sorrows, and went on for such a long time because she really was touched that, like, wow, somebody was looking at a person, telling her she was doing something that's part of the process of redemption. So we're very powerful. And definitely with people you have a relationship with, it's good to use it, good to help them. So he's reminding them of God and saying, God be with you. This is very innovative, meaning that wasn't what people did. This first time these harvesters are hearing it. But again, knee-jerk response, he blessed them. Well, they wanted to bless him. Well, what was the blessing he needed? I mean, he's very rich. He's very honorable. He's the head of the Jewish people. Well, what they were blessing him for was with a wife. He just lost his wife. He just got up from the morning. So he said, God be with you in your harvest. You should understand it's all coming from God. And they responded, may God bless you with what you're lacking. May God give you a wife. Because, of course, it's as if a home without a wife is really not a blessed home. Boaz then said to his servants who were overseeing the harvest, to his servant who was overseeing the harvester. Now, these harvesters were like the common, workers. And then over that was the manager, somebody that worked for Boaz and was like the manager of this operation. So he says to his servant who was overseeing this operation, to whom does that young woman belong? Now he's talking about Ruth. He's questioning Ruth, like, what's he doing here? So obviously it's like, what's Boaz doing looking at the woman and asking about them? Totally not befitting of his persona, of his stature, of his age. Well, what was he asking about? Like, what would he care? What have anything to do with his life? And why is he inquiring about a woman? It doesn't seem very modest. So the sages say he didn't come to the field to check out the women, but he noticed her and he was very surprised. What made him really notice her as he's really here we didn't even know why. He's here to meet Bruce, but he doesn't know that. Two things. One thing is he saw that she was very knowledgeable in Jewish law, meaning when the poor people came, they weren't so knowledgeable, so they often took things they weren't allowed to take because they didn't know the exact nuances of law, what they're allowed to take and what they're not allowed to take. And he saw just by watching her that she did not take some pieces because according to Jewish law, it was questionable if she could take them. And he was like, wow, how does this beggar woman know Jewish law so well? And something else that struck him very much, which we've already noted a few times in connection to Rus, was her natural modesty and refinement. In what way did he see she was so modest? In a lot of ways. Things are very noticeable. One thing is, to get the gleaning, sometimes you have to stretch up and sometimes you have to be down. And he saw she was very careful that if it was something tall, she stood up and took it. If it was something on the ground, she went down to the ground and take it. She didn't bend down. She didn't do anything that would expose her body. She literally went down to the ground to pick it up. But then if something was high, she stood up, which is, a lot of unnecessary exercise and straining her muscles, but she had to be modest. A lot of the women then would sort of like pick up their skirts. They always had long skirts in those days, and like pick up their skirts to make it easier to walk among and not anything to get caught, in the fields on the bottom of the skirt, shouldn't get caught in anything. She didn't pick up her skirts. A lot of the women would sort of make some casual conversation with the men that are harvesting or the men in the fields. She didn't talk to anyone. So he's looking at her. He's like, who is this woman? She's knowledgeable in a way I've never seen a person of that stature be knowledgeable. And she's modest in a way that you don't see these people usually being modest. So it's not that he normally would be like noticing the women, but he really noticed because her modesty and her knowledge and her fearing of God to be so scrupulous in the laws really impressed him. He's like, who is she? Um, it's interesting, like both in these things, like you could say, again, obviously one way or another, Boaz would have noticed Rus, but I think it's also interesting how when we see how careful she was, again, going back to that theme I was saying, like here, she was careful because it says if 3 sheaves were fallen, you couldn't take them, only if there were 2. In other words, 3 is a significant enough number that the harvester's probably going to come back and get them. So you can't just take them, but if it was 2 already, you could take it. So she was very careful. She saw 3 sheaves she didn't take, only if there were 2. So a person could look at her and say, oh, come on, Rus, what are you being so fanatical about? You think they're really going to come back for this? Look, they're a mile ahead of you. They're not paying any attention. They need to come back for 3 pieces. It's a law. It's a law nobody follows. What are you bothering for? And yet, specifically, those behaviors is what had Boaz notice her. And the same thing with the modesty. Oh, come on, Rus. Everyone picks up their skirt. What, you want to come home with it full of, the dirt of the fields? Like, come on, be real. You're making yourself so tired. You stand up, you sit down, you stand up, you sit down. You know what your muscles are going to feel like at the end of the day? Nobody does that. Well, you think any of the harvesters are looking at you? You think they care about you? They're way ahead anyway. They're not paying attention. They're busy with their work. They're looking at you, and why are you bothering? Very often when we're being careful in law or in modesty or any of these details, these thoughts, other people could say them or your own brain could say them to you. What are you bothering for? What difference does it make? So you take 3 if there's 3, or 2 if there's 2, who cares? So you pick up your skirt, you don't look up your skirt, you bend down, you don't have to crouch down, you stand up. Yeah. But specifically, these details were what created Boaz's awareness of Rus. Meaning to say that God's in the details. And that when we're serving God, yes, he cares about the details. If he wants you to wait 6 hours from meat to milk, it doesn't mean 5.5. It actually means 6. And when he wants you to make a blessing before something and a blessing after something, yeah, he really means it. A blessing before and a blessing after. And if you eat this amount, you don't make a blessing after. If you make this amount, you do. And it's this blessing, which is the correct blessing. All these things are so detail-oriented. Lots of details in all of Jewish law. A person can feel, whatever. So important. God in big strokes is very important. God, my love of God, my fear of God, my relationship with God. But these little tiny things, what difference does it make? Specifically, God's found in the details. And specifically, her adherence to the details of law, of modesty, is what creates the relationship that's about to happen. Now, again, there's differing opinions on was anyone else around gleaning when she was gleaning. So some were like, there were a few other women around, but again, most of the people, everyone agrees that most of the people were in the corners. It didn't really make that much sense to be gleaning. So for some commentators, they say, no, she was literally the only person there. Like nobody else would bother. And that's why he noticed her. And he's like, who is she? Like he was assuming she must be related to somebody that works here. Because why else would she bother? And maybe there's something not so kosher going on. Maybe one of the workers is a relative. So he dumps a lot of things that he's leaving behind carelessly so she could go and pick up a lot. Because people, as I said, didn't bother at this point in the harvest to do this. They went for the corners that were much more productive, much more profitable. It was much more lucrative than the gleanings. So maybe she's related to someone, maybe someone sort of surreptitiously leaving, if you have a friend who works at a store and he marks something on final clearance right when you walk in so you can grab it for a great discount. Something going on here illicit because it's sort of weird. Why would someone be gleaning? People don't bother, and not at this point. And some say that the whole thing was just the hand of God, meaning The whole thing didn't make sense. That Rus happened to come exactly to Boaz's field. That Boaz happened to come to his field, which he didn't normally do. And that he happened to notice her. And that he even spoke about it. All of this was the same way God orchestrated her to go to the field. And God orchestrated Boaz to go to the field when she's there. And God orchestrated Boaz to notice her. And to take it even a step further and ask about her. Like, that's so like it's a big stretch. What in the world does he care about this woman? Okay, she's modest. Okay, she's learned. She's God-fearing. Okay, she maybe is related to someone. Okay, maybe some of my workers are being a little dishonest with me. What does he care? You know, putting everything there, it still is the hand of God that he said something to actually find out who this woman was and therefore continue this further. Which sometimes is very interesting, that also in our lives, sometimes we're really overtly pawns in God's script, meaning sometimes we do something and we think we know why we're doing it. And then someone says to you, oh my gosh, that you did that. That was so meaningful. And you're like thinking, what? What did I even do? I don't even know why I did that. I've had things like that in my life sometimes where I didn't even know why I did whatever I did. I wasn't putting a lot of thought into it, and I did, but there was a reason I did it for another person. And later I found out why I did it, and I didn't know. I don't know if anyone's ever had that experience, that they see how God moves the pieces, and they're just sometimes just facilitating God's script. Sometimes God is more subtle and you don't realize, but it's happening all the time. All the time, people to us and us to people, that we do things. Again, we don't think I'm sleepwalking and don't know why I'm doing this. This is very strange. Why am I doing this? But just things happen. And then afterwards, you're like, oh, wow, yeah, why did I do that? Oh, it was because for that person, for that situation, for that, I don't know. It happens a lot. Firma supported me. She said, definitely, it happens a lot. Open your eyes to see it. You will see that God has a lot of scripts going on, and very often we're the player, not only in our own script, but for many other people. And specific things we do that to us was sort of random, not random at all. It's specifically for someone else's storyline. Verse 6. So Boaz says to the servant, very unusually he's there. Very unusually he's noticing this woman. Very unusually he's inquiring about her. So the servant responded, she's a Moabite girl. The servant who was overseeing the harvesters replied, the one that returned with Naomi from the fields of Moab. So now, by the way, we keep saying girl, 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 girl. She was about 40 at this time, but she was very beautiful. So in her appearance, they were calling her the girl. She seemed so young and youthful and beautiful. And really, I'm saying age, she was right about 40. Now, when he said she's a Moabite girl, do you think he was saying it as like a compliment to what a wonderful girl she was, that she's a Moabite girl, or as sort of like a Boaz, don't think so highly of her, don't get so infatuated, don't pay attention, she's just a Moabite? How would you interpret that?
Don't be so excited about her.
Okay, so Firma's don't be excited, she's a Moabite. Anyone else has any opinion on what they feel the servant meant? Why did he identify her as a Moabite girl? Positive, negative, or neutral, just descriptive? Who is she? Oh, this is how I'm describing her. She's a Moabite. Or negative. Don't pay attention, Boaz. Don't look there. She's a Moabite. Or, oh, she's really special. She's the Moabite convert.
It's probably somewhere in between negative or just
neutral,
different.
But so either it's negative. Why would he be negative? Why would he want to say negatively, oh, she's a Moabite?
Because it wasn't a very friendly nation to Jews, right? So from that point of view, it could be negative, or just it's different. It's easy to identify because she was the only one.
The absolutely only one. Absolutely true. Any other thoughts on it? why you think the servant identified her as a Moabite? He didn't say she's just the girl that's with Naomi. He didn't say she's Naomi's daughter-in-law. He said she's the Moabite. Now, Pav could be right. It could just be an easy label, an easy marker. It could be negative, as Chava said, or as Froma was saying, you know, Moabites were not people that the Jews thought highly of and weren't generally too moral, good people, or too good to the Jews for sure. So don't be excited, Boaz. She's a Moabite. Any other thoughts on how you would understand this man's words? Why he chose to say she's a Moabite instead of, he could have said she's a convert. He said she's a Moabite.
Maybe because he knew that Jews were not supposed to marry Moabites. Maybe
Good
he knew
thinking,
this.
Menucha. So that would continue Chavan from his train of this being very negative. Again, I see Boaz, he's just widowed, he's noticing a woman. Maybe he's thinking something positive. Boaz, don't go there. She's a Moabite. She's a convert, but she's a Moabite. You know, we don't marry Moabite, even Moabite converts. So any other thoughts on why he would have said she's a Moabite?
Maybe the story was well known about Naomi and the husband that they went to Moab and they got married. Maybe people knew about the story about daughter-in-laws converted.
It was
Right?
well known.
Yeah.
Absolutely was well. It was definitely, if you remember, we said when Rus and Naomi came back, the whole town was gathered, maybe because of, we said, the traditional Omer offering, or because to pay respect for Boaz's wife that had just died. So everybody was shusking about them. Everyone was talking about them. There's a lot to talk about. You know, certain things are obviously a topic of conversation. First, Elimelech abandons them. Well, obviously everyone was talking. And he dies, and he's impoverished, and the sons die, and the sons married Moabite women, and Naomi comes back, and she looks so old, she looks so bad. She looks like she's been through who knows what. Oh my gosh. You know, these people that maybe were a little jealous of her, all talking, and definitely, oh my gosh, she brought back with her a Moabite daughter-in-law. Yes, this was definitely hot on the lips of the people, and definitely you could see Rus hadn't identified herself. Notice, at no point did Rus say, "Hello, I am Rus the Moabite. Can I glean in your fields?" And he knew exactly who she was. So yes, definitely there was this notoriety, you know.
What he
there.
said further sounds like positive. He added, she's the one who returned with Naomi from the field of Moab.
Good. That
That's
definitely is a way of understanding it, that you could say, oh, okay, she's a Moabite and she gave up everything to go with her destitute mother-in-law. So maybe it's a very positive thing, and maybe he's saying this to praise her. Not per se that he thinks Boaz should marry her, but I don't think he's thinking along those lines, but like, oh, she's a very honorable person. You know, she's not, you're right, she's not just a regular beggar, collector. You see, she's different. Well, she is different. She sacrificed everything to help her mother-in-law. She sacrificed everything for Judaism. Remember, by the way, they're related. Boaz, Naomi, Rus's former husband is Boaz's cousin. There's that familial relationship here, which he should be nicer because, hey, she's family. You know, if you could envision this concept, if you were a employer and suddenly find out that one of your poor workers, like low on the totem pole, is your long lost cousin, your long lost nephew, your long lost, you know, like, oh wow, you know, that implies a certain obligation to be very nice to them, to help them. So there's a lot of different nuances in the verse, and different sages look at it differently. The majority voice of the sages, meaning the majority of the opinions, if I would count the opinions, the majority go in the direction of Froma, Chava, Menucha, that he was knocking her. But there definitely are opinions like Rachel, looking at the words of the verse, that he was saying it actually in her praise, to mark how, you know, hey, you're right, she is you notice that she's a special woman. You're right, she is a very special woman. Look what she sacrificed to be here gleaning in your fields. So we have commentators. So some commentators say, a few of them say, she's a Moabite girl with a really good mother-in-law. So You see she's so scrupulous on law. You see she's so modest. She's a Moabite. She doesn't know much. She's not naturally such a modest person, but her mother-in-law taught her well. That's why we're bringing in, her mother-in-law. Naomi, she's a very special person. So Naomi drilled her well, like what she's allowed to take, what she's not allowed to take, how she has to dress, how she has to crouch down, how she has to stand up. Like, don't give her any credit. She just has a good mother-in-law there who's training her well to behave properly. So bringing in the mother-in-law, according to several sages, was sort of to say, there's no credit to her. She's a Moabite. But her mother-in-law knew the rules, knew the ropes, knew how she should behave. Some say even that he says it's a Moabite girl. Again, she was 40 years old, but she did look much younger than that. But he was sort of emphasizing she's a girl like Boaz. You're 80 years old. What are you paying attention to this girl for? Don't go there. She's young. She's nothing to do with you. And she's a Moabite. And as Menucha said, the general assumption of the Jewish people was you weren't allowed to marry a Moabite convert. So emphasizing she's Moabite means off limits. Don't even think about her, Boaz. I know you're newly widowed. She's a Moabite. She's not someone you could ever marry. Maybe he's even saying she's a Moabite to say, like, why is she referring to as a Moabite now? That's not nice. She's a Jew. Once you're converted, you're a Jew. You're not a Moabite anymore. When we say Onkelos is a nice Roman boy, he wasn't a Roman boy. He's a Jew. Once you convert, you're a Jew. So for him to say Moabite is really a real knock. And it's really saying like, they say she converted.
Wait, isn't it like actually against the Torah to mention someone is a convert?
It's against the Torah to say it to the person would be an insult and therefore would be against the Torah. I don't know that he was literally tripping over the law, because you could say he was just informing his boss on the status of this woman, which is what he asked. But it could have been with negative intentions, just like when in the Torah portion, if you remember the story of Joseph, when he finally is brought before Pharaoh, before Paro, what happened? He had been in the prison with the baker and the butler, and he explained their dreams correctly. The baker died. The butler was going to be freed. They said to the butler, please remember me. You're going to be freed. I know. I've seen the dream. You're going to be freed. I've been stuck here for all these years. Please remember me. He was in that pit for years and years and years. Please remember me to Pharaoh. Of course, he forgot him completely. And when it came up that he remembered him, when there was another, situation with dreams, and I remember the person that remembered his dreams, he also, in a very disparaging way, mentioned Joseph to Pharaoh. Even though he's mentioning him and he's saying he correctly interpreted my dream and you're pretty stuck, so maybe look at him, but he's a young boy, he knows nothing. Eved, he's a slave, can never be a ruler here. Ivri, he's a Jew, he's not part of our culture. Like, even when he was mentioning him for good, he was knocking him at the same time. Knock, 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 knock. Even though he was remembering him as like someone that might help you in this situation, but don't think too highly of him. So maybe the servant was really wrong, as From was saying, and he shouldn't have mentioned that she was a convert. Again, it's not forbidden to say someone's a convert. To say someone's a convert could be a very big compliment. Or to say someone's a convert could be factual information, like, oh, you can have this person over your house while they're a convert, so you wouldn't want to talk about certain things that maybe would be sensitive to them. That's not forbidden. You just can't do something to embarrass them. But maybe his saying it was like, she's still a Moabite. I mean, she's a Moabite. She's not a Moabite. She's a Jew. She's still a Moabite. Officially, she converted. In her heart, she's still a Moabite. Maybe. And some say that he was even trying to say, like, sort of feeling that his master might go along the lines of being interested in this woman. Even if you technically could marry her, why would you? Like, why go for a Moabite when there's so many nice Jewish girls around? It's not appropriate. What are you looking to a Moabite for? Look, you're interested in a woman? Okay, your wife just passed away. You're looking for a woman. Look for a nice Jewish girl. There are many. Don't go in the direction of a Moabite. Again, Others twist it around the other direction, though it's a minority opinion. The majority opinion is, as most of you majority, your majority vote was that he was viewing this negatively. So the majority of the commentators also view this negative, but the minority, like Rachel, there was that voice of the minority that says, no, all of these things are actually praising her. Maybe he was saying it also to defend himself. Like maybe he felt like, whoa, Boaz is saying, what's this woman doing here? Like, how are you letting this woman glean here? And he was defending himself and saying, no, she's not like, you see her, she doesn't look so Jewish. Maybe she looks a little foreign. No, she's not the regular foreigner. She's the Moabite that came back with Naomi. She's the one that converted. She's a Jew. She's allowed to glean here. Maybe that's why he said it that way. Or maybe he was actually singing her praises and saying, oh, she's young, you can marry her. She's a Moabite woman, not a man. The women you can marry, not the men. She came back with Naomi. She's a very sincere person. She gave up everything to be so destitute with Naomi and, make sure her mother-in-law wasn't abandoned. Like, she's a really special person. You're right. You have good taste. She's very special. She's very worthy. So there is that opinion as well. And as we say, these and these are the words of the living God. So somehow all of these things were all occurring on some level. The next verse, I think we have time for it. I can't really. No. Actually, we don't, because I would do Angela. Okay, we'll stop at this point. So we're up to verse 7, where we're going to see that now Rus, noticing what's happening or not, now she understands Boaz as the owner, and she starts talking to him, and then we'll see Boaz's response to her. This is all moving what God wants forward, which is ultimately the creation of the line of David and the line of Mashiach. So just to continue in the laws of Shabbos, of the Sabbath, that we try to do, and remember toward the end of the class. So last week we spoke about how everybody has an obligation to personally do something. Even if you're very rich, you got plenty of people around, or just other people take care of it for you, but you should personally be involved in some preparation for the Sabbath. Like I said, my husband always sets out the candle, the trays, he melts the candles in, burns, whatever, all that stuff. That's like a physical job, just so that he's literally physically part of preparing for the Sabbath, which obviously is probably not a problem because we're probably all physically prepared for the Sabbath. Something else that we're supposed to do before the Sabbath is clean up the house. Now, probably many of us do because it's sort of the natural feeling, oh, the Sabbath is coming, you want to have a clean house. But it's actually something the sages want us to do because, again, it shows the respect and honor for the Sabbath, that you should set the table in honor of the Sabbath. You should set out the chairs properly. You should organize things, even like organize the bedroom, set out the beds properly. So when you come at night to sleep, all the beds are made so beautifully. Oh, this is special. Usually it's a bit of a mess. No, now everything's laid out so nicely in a little hotel room here because it's a Sabbath. So all of these details are all honoring the Sabbath. So it could be that many of you do this just sort of as natural womanly feeling, how you're supposed to give honor to the Sabbath. But this is literally the law, that you're supposed to do all of these things to prepare your house for this special honored guest, the Sabbath. It's a custom, and it's definitely something very important to do, to put a tablecloth on the table in honor of the Sabbath. Ideally, a white tablecloth is, of course, if you prefer colored, you could. But even if you normally don't have a tablecloth on your table, but for the Sabbath, you're supposed to have a tablecloth. Some people even are careful to have 2 tablecloths, because if they're going to, some people went to clean off the crumbs, they remove the tablecloth to clean off the crumbs. So if you remove the tablecloth to clean off the crumbs, they don't want to leave the table bare. You're not supposed to leave the table bare on the Sabbath. So they literally have a second tablecloth underneath. So when they remove off the crumbs, they're taking off the first tablecloth to brush off the crumbs, the table is covered. So it is that big a deal, for those of you that didn't know that this was the custom, to make sure you have a tablecloth. You might have noticed, if you ever go to someone's house on the Sabbath, they always have their table with a tablecloth. And that is why. That is literally something that's written as something we're supposed to do to give honor to the Sabbath, to make sure the table has a tablecloth on it always.
What if it's like you have guests over, so you have like a fold away table? So you're like, after your guests leave, you're like, okay, I'm gonna put the fold away table, or should you keep that out all Shabbos?
Well, you have well, first of all, you have to make sure that legally you can close it up on the Sabbath. But if you can, you have your table covered with a tablecloth, the regular table. But if you don't, if this is your only table, then you should leave it out. Like if your only table is a folding table that you just open up when the people come and you want to close afterwards to get out of the way, no, you shouldn't do that. You should really leave it out as part of the honor of the Sabbath, the table with the tablecloth. You're supposed to leave the salt on the table the entire Sabbath, all 25 hours. So that's also something we're told should never be taken off the table. Everything else is clean. Make sure you leave the salt on. So but if it was an extra table that you could take away, but you still have your regular table, it's not a problem. You know, as long as, again, on the Sabbath, you can fold it up properly.
Cyril, so is this a law or a custom?
Which one? I just said a few things.
For example, to have tablecloths, is it a law?
It's something, well, it's something suggested by the sages. So it's hard to, what exactly, where does a custom begin is hard to say. Meaning, if the implication is, if I don't have a tablecloth, am I transgressing a sin? No, you're not transgressing a sin.
Okay.
But is it something that, some, nice balabusta a few hundred years ago decided made her room look nicer, and then all the other women in her neighborhood were like, oh, I want to do that too. No, this is something written. So it's written in the books of law, but just because it's written in the books of law, that doesn't mean if you don't do it, you transgressed. Like I just said, something that's very strongly written is to have salt on your table the entire Sabbath. But that doesn't, again, because the table is like the altar, and it says salt should never leave the altar, so salt should never leave your table on the Sabbath. So this is all in Talmudic sources. So it's not just something that evolved over time. But if a person doesn't keep salt on their table, it's not that God's going to punish them. It's not that they got an X on their scorecard. But all of these things that we hold as very precious. We hold as something that create let's say the concept of a custom. We're told that a custom is a very significant thing that we have to do. Our sages say a Jewish custom is Torah, Minhag Yisrael Torahi. Jewish custom is Torah, meaning it's obligatory. And it's very interesting when we have the child by the Seder and he asks the 4 questions, Manishtanas, the first one he's asking is actually about a custom. And that order is deliberate to bring out this point of specifically the custom is what's going to grab the eyes of the child. The custom is what gives the richness and the flavor of Judaism. And on a certain spiritual level and a sort of mystical level, we're told the highest energies come into the customs. So I'm not saying these things are considered customs. I think they're considered things the sages say you're supposed to do. So I don't know if they fall in the category of customs or not. But we should never knock a custom because a custom has enormous energy, specifically that it came down as a custom. An ancient custom of the Jews is hakafos on Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. The dancing of the Torah, that's a Jewish custom. Very, very revered custom since the time of the early prophets. Eating dairy on the Shavuos holiday is a custom, ancient custom going all the way back to when the Jews got the Torah. So these customs are integral to Judaism and should be revered as such. But I don't know if these things fall into the category of custom. I think they fall into the category of things the sages said to do. Like, again, not an injunction that one transgresses if they don't, but definitely something important. I definitely know the tablecloth is considered very important.
Right.
Like it's considered like a problem to not have, it's like, you should make sure you always have a tablecloth on.
Right. So for example, not to turn off light on Shabbos
Is a law.
It's at some point it became a law.
It's a law, right.
When electricity came around.
The law predated electricity. When electricity came down, the sages at that time said, yes, electricity is fire, and therefore all the laws of fire apply to it.
Okay.
So that's a law. And if one turned on the light, then that would be a transgression. That would be a violation. That would be a sin, transgression. If you don't have your tablecloth covering your table, I don't think it's considered a transgression, but it's considered very important to have the tablecloth on. Now, I'm saying to the degree that some people have the custom of having 2 tablecloths. to make sure that if they have to take off one, the other one's still there. So the table should never be bare.
Okay. What about put like whatever, search the table, put plates and whatever? Can it be done during the Shabbos, or it has to be done before Shabbos starts?
It's considered very good that before the Shabbos, it says your table is set. Your table is set doesn't necessarily mean you have dishes on. You might not necessarily have your glassware on. It could just mean you have forks or napkins, you know, whatever that means to you. But on some, what is considered very significant, very important, like if you want to be minimalistic, is that before Shabbos, your tablecloth is on, your challah board, your challah covering, and your salt. Those are
Challah before Shabbos on the
yes.
table?
Yes, that's the most important thing that should be on the table before Shabbos is the challahs.
Oh, I always keep it warm until the last moment.
So what you could do then, if you want to do that, or you just don't want to take it, maybe it's wrapped up in plastic and you don't want to sit outside for an hour and dry out, put matzah under. Like that, you are supposed to have what's a challah on that table before Shabbos. That's what's very important.
So I can put something that not necessarily we're going to eat on Shabbos?
Yeah, maybe put 2 rolls there. They're not the rolls you're going to eat, but just have 2 rolls there so yours can stay warm, but your challah is supposed to be on the table before Shabbos.
And then what we want to eat, I can put
Bring
on,
out,
so
yeah, right before. I sometimes put out matzah or something like that if for whatever reason, you know, we eat very late. I don't want to leave my challahs out for hours and hours and hours. So I sometimes do that, but I make sure it's on the table with a challah board under it and a challah cover over it before Shabbos. Now, I like to have my table set before Shabbos because that's considered a very good thing to have your table set before Shabbos. But the most minimal thing, if you're racing the clock, is the challah, with the challah board under it, the challah cover over it, and the salt. And the salt should stay on the table the entire Shabbos. And the table should have a tablecloth. So those are like minimal. And then, yes, it's nice to set your table. It's nice. Everything should be beautiful in honor of Shabbos. It's nice that your silverware should be polished and your candlestick should be polished and everything should look so beautiful. And that's all honoring the Shabbos. It's all making the Shabbos beautiful by having a beautiful table, just as having a very clean house, just as yourself being dressed appropriately. It's all part of giving a very physical expression of honor to the Shabbos. But if that was a big stretch and there's a lot of things and you don't own a tablecloth or want to wash it once a week, some people put plastic on their tablecloth so they don't have to wash it every time. We don't, because my husband thinks it does look much nicer if it's not in plastic, so I do wash it. But I have a lot of tablecloths, so I'm okay. But whatever you can do, the theme is very straightforward. The theme is to give honor and beauty to the Sabbath. And one of the most beautiful things to do to give honor and beauty to the Sabbath is to light the candles early. Ushering the Sabbath early is a very beautiful way to express honor to the Sabbath.
Then there's even less time to make everything else beautiful.
Well, you know what? It's all in your headspace what time you tell yourself Sabbath is coming. If Shabbos comes in at 4:30, but you tell yourself it's coming in at 4, so you can even be a few minutes late and you're still like 20 minutes early. You know, it's just mind games with yourself. Because if it's coming in at 7 or if it's coming in at 4, you never have time. So whatever time you tell yourself, okay, you're not gonna have time whatever time it comes in. So you just work around that. I had a year with my son Dover that I had to drive, let's say in the early winter when Shabbos comes out like 4, and I had to drive to where he was his school and pick him up, and which means like for the rest of Chicago was coming at 4. For me, it was coming at like 3. And for that period, I just knew, okay, Shabbos comes in at 3. By 3 o'clock, I have to be completely ready because I have to jump in the car and pick him up and come back and light my candles. So that's it. Shabbos came in at 3 that winter, and I just dealt with it. No, that was it. It's just whatever it is, you just deal with it. But it's important. Anyway, have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for joining, and hopefully some of these ideas you can remember them and live with them throughout the rest of the week as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.